Olá, boa noite. Ele diz que nosso futuro está ligado ao futuro dos pobres, das plantas, dos animais, aconteça o que acontecer. É o raciocínio básico da espiritualidade, mas é um raciocínio ausente nos segmentos da sociedade que detêm o poder, como os políticos e os homens de negócio. O Roda Viva entrevista hoje o físico nuclear indiano Amit Goswami, considerado um importante cientista da atualidade. Ele tem instigado os meios acadêmicos com sua busca de uma ponte entre a ciência e a espiritualidade. Amit Goswami vive nos Estados Unidos, é PhD em Física Quântica e professor titular da Universidade de Física da Universidade de Oregon. Há mais de 15 anos está envolvido em estudos que buscam construir o ponto de união entre a física quântica e a espiritualidade. Já foi rotulado de místico pela comunidade científica e acabou acalmando os críticos através de várias publicações técnicas a respeito de suas ideias. Em seu livro, O Universo Autoconsciente, publicado recentemente no Brasil, ele procura demonstrar que o universo é matematicamente inconsistente e sem a existência de um conjunto superior, no caso, Deus. E diz que se esses estudos se desenvolverem logo no início do terceiro milênio, Deus será objeto da ciência e não mais da religião. Para entrevistar o nosso convidado de hoje, nós convidamos o educador Pierre Weil, reitor da Universidade Holística Internacional de Brasília, Unipaz. O filósofo Mário Sérgio Cortella, doutor em educação, professor do Departamento de Teologia e Ciências da Religião da PUC São Paulo. O jornalista Cláudio Weber Abramo, mestre em Filosofia da Ciência. A escritora e editora de livros, Rose Marie Muraro. A jornalista Lia Diskin, cofundadora da Associação Palas Athena. O psiquiatra e analista junguiano, Joel Giglio, do Departamento de Psicologia Médica e Psiquiatria da Unicamp. E o físico Carlos Ziller, que é doutor em Filosofia e pesquisador do Museu de Astronomia do Ministério da Ciência e Tecnologia. O Roda Viva é transmitido em rede nacional para todos os estados da Federação Brasileira, inclusive Brasília. O programa hoje está gravado e, por isso, não será possível a participação dos telespectadores, como é comum aqui no programa. Dr. Amit Goswami, boa noite.
Boa noite.
Dr. Goswami, inicialmente eu gostaria que o senhor dissesse aos telespectadores da TV Cultura que, ao longo do século XX, os cientistas estiveram ligados muito mais ao materialismo do que à religiosidade. A impressão que eu tenho é que nessa virada para o século XXI, essas coisas estão mudando. O senhor poderia nos explicar por que dessa aproximação entre a ciência e a espiritualidade?
Gladly. This change of science towards a very materialistic view, from a very materialistic view towards a rather spiritual view, has been almost totally due to the advent of quantum physics. Simultaneously, there has been some changes in transpersonal psychology, in evolutionary biology, and medicine. But I think it is fair to say that the revolution in physics that quantum physics brought about in the turn of the century, with the concept of discontinuous transitions, not only continuous motion but discontinuous movement, non-locality, not only local transfer of information but non-local transfer of information. And then finally the concept of downward causation. This is a very interesting concept because physicists have always thought, scientists have always thought that causation rises from the base up, elementary particles to atoms to molecules to cells to brain, and brain is everything. Brain gives us consciousness, mind, all these subjective phenomena. But what we found in quantum physics is that consciousness is necessary, the observer is necessary. It is the observer who converts waves of possibility that quantum objects are into actual events and actual objects. So this idea that consciousness is a brain product gives us paradoxes. Instead, the idea grew that it is consciousness that is causal as well. So the idea of downward causation grew. So I would say this revolution that quantum physics brought with three revolutionary concepts: discontinuous movement, non-local relationship, interconnectedness, and then finally, in addition to upward causation of normal Newtonian science, the concept of downward causation, consciousness choosing among possibilities the actual event. These are the three revolutionary concepts. So if there is downward causation, can we identify this downward causation as something that is over and above the materialist view of the world? So God has an entry point. We now know how God, if you will, consciousness, interacts with the world through choice of quantum possibilities.
Vou passar a pergunta para a Rosemarie. Rosemarie, por favor.
O que mais me espanta na física é o problema da medição quântica de Heisenberg, que você realmente acha que deve ter um observador olhando, que modifica a realidade. Por exemplo, transforma a onda em partícula. Eu gostaria de saber, isso aí, houve uma grande briga de Einstein com Niels Bohr. Eu gostaria de saber, em escala cósmica, onde não há observadores, se há um observador supremo, na sua opinião, e se ele cria matéria, ou como se faz esse fenômeno?
This is, of course, the fundamental question, Rosemarie, because what is the role of the observer is the question that opens up the question of integration of physics and spirituality. We find in quantum physics, for 7 decades, people have tried to negate the observer. Somehow, people have felt that we must keep physics objective. If we acknowledge any role for the observer, then physics would not be objective anymore. The famous debate between Bohr and Einstein that you referred to, that debate essentially always ended up by Bohr really winning the point that there is no phenomenon in the world unless it is registered. Now, Bohr shied away from using consciousness, but now a consensus is growing very gradually, very slowly, that quantum physics is not complete unless we agree that no phenomenon is a phenomenon unless it is registered phenomenon in an observer, in an observer's consciousness. And this then becomes the basis of a new science. This is the science that is gradually but surely integrating science and spiritual concepts.
Cláudio Abrão, você, Cláudio.
Em sua fala inicial, o senhor mencionou, deu como fato que teria crescido a ideia de que haveria uma causalidade, no sentido inverso àquele que tradicionalmente se considera, e daí saltou para a afirmação de que isso abriria a porta para a entrada de Deus. Bom, a minha pergunta se divide em duas. Em primeiro lugar, essa ideia cresceu aonde? Quer dizer, quem, além do senhor, defende esse tipo de visão de mundo? E dois, por que Deus entrou aí nessa equação?
In quantum physics, there is a movement that is continuous. Quantum physics predicts that. There is no question that quantum mathematics is very able, very capable, and it predicts the development of waves of possibility. Matter is portrayed as waves of possibility. How these waves of possibility spread, this is completely predicted by quantum physics. But so what? now we have probabilities of possibilities. No actual event is predicted by quantum physics. In order to connect quantum physics to actual observations, where we never see possibilities and probabilities, we actually see actualities. This is the quantum measurement problem. And people have struggled with this problem for decades, as I mentioned earlier, but no materialist solution keeping within the primacy of matter has succeeded. On the other hand, if we posit that it is consciousness which chooses among the possibilities, then we have an answer. But this answer is not mathematical. We have to go outside of mathematics. No quantum mathematics exists for this event of change of possibility wave into actual events, which physicists call collapse of the wave of possibility into actuality. So it is this discontinuity of the collapse that is forcing us to go outside of physics for an answer. Now, what is very interesting is that if you postulate that consciousness, the observer, is collapsing the wave of possibility, choosing the one actuality that is taking place, you can ask the question, what is the nature of consciousness? And you find astounding answer. This consciousness that chooses and collapses the wave of possibility is not the individual consciousness of the observer. Instead, it is a cosmic consciousness. So the observer does not collapse in an ordinary state of consciousness, but in the non-ordinary state of consciousness in which he is part of the consciousness cosmica. This is very interesting. What is cosmic consciousness but the concept of God that mystics and theologians talk about?
Professor Cortella, depois você pergunta. Professor Cortella, por favor.
Uma questão para o Dr. Emmett, que é a seguinte. O senhor é originado de uma cultura, que é a cultura da Índia, né, onde o hinduísmo, como religião, tem uma profusão de deuses, ou de divindades, ou de deidades. Alguns chegam a falar em 300 milhões, né, de deidades dentro da religião hindu. De outro lado, seu pai foi um guru brahmane. O senhor tem um irmão que é filósofo. Esta mescla de situações, ela induziu no senhor uma compreensão em relação a um ponto de chegada na religião partindo da física, ou o senhor já partiu da religião e por isso chegou até a física e supõe que a física quântica é uma das formas de praticar teologia?
Thank you for the question. Because it is often asked to me, you know, if my upbringing as a Indian Hindu affect the way I do physics. Actually, I became a materialist for quite some time. I spent in physics as a materialist physics from age 14 to until mid-40s. So materialism is very dear to me. I worked with it, I philosophized in it, I thrived in it. I succeeded as a physicist within the bounds of materialist physics. What happened was that when I started doing the quantum measurement problem, I really was trying to solve it within materialism. As all of us were struggling, I remember talking to many other physicists who were doing the same problem. You know, this is the most studied problem in physics, one of the most studied problems. And every one of us was struggling how to solve this paradox of if consciousness is a brain phenomenon, it obeys quantum physics, how can conscious observation of an event then collapses the wave of possibility into the actual thing that we are seeing? Because consciousness itself is a possibility. Possibility cannot possibly collapse possibility. So I had to go out of this materialist thinking entirely. How we got there is interesting. In my personal life, I was feeling the necessity of change. Some people talk about this as a midlife transition. And the two problems, personal life growth and the answer to the quantum measurement problem, became entangled. So I started looking at consciousness not only as a physics problem, but also as a personal problem. What is it that makes one happy? What is it, the nature of consciousness, that people talk about when people think other than materialist ways? So I started meditating and hobnobbing with some mystics, And these things helped. And indeed, one day, while I was talking with a mystic, and he was giving me what the usual mystical view of the world is, which I have heard many times before, but somehow this particular conversation just produced an about turn in me. I could see. I really saw beyond thought. I had an insight that consciousness is the ground of being, and that insight solves the quantum measurement problem. Not only that, it can be used as a basis for science. Usually scientists assume that science must be objective, etc. But I saw in that moment that yes, science has to be objective to a reasonable amount. I call it weak objectivity. But that can be achieved within this new metaphysics. Consciousness is the ground of all being. So for me, it has been the other way around. I came from physics into spirituality, from the side of physics. Because my spiritual upbringing, although in retrospect I can say that it was helpful, it must have been in what Freud would say in the subconscious. But consciously, it is the other way around. I really came from the tremendous burning question of how to solve a physics problem, how to solve a world problem, because this really is the most important problem of 20th century. And from that conceptual leap, that quantum leap of insight brought me into recognizing that the way spiritual people look at consciousness is the right way to look at consciousness. And that way to look at consciousness solves the quantum measurement problem. It gives us a basis for a new science.
Dr. Ziller, por favor. Dr. Ziller.
Eu gostaria de fazer uma pergunta, assim, dando um passo um pouco mais atrás, digamos, no sentido da própria física clássica, porque nós sabemos hoje em dia que os fundadores da física clássica, Newton, Descartes e outros, enfim, grandes cientistas do século XVII, para eles, para o projeto científico que eles propunham, Deus era uma parte constitutiva e inseparável, né, do mundo que eles imaginavam, seja como sendo quem garantia a eficácia, a eficiência, o funcionamento das leis do mundo, né, seja como alguém que operava os próprios fenômenos naturais. Bom, isso foi sendo afastado, Deus foi sendo, digamos assim, expulso, né, do mundo da ciência ao longo do século XVIII, do século XIX. Bom, o século XX, talvez até os anos 50, tenha sido o ápice dessa questão. Os cientistas, os físicos, sobretudo, não gostavam absolutamente nada de falar desse assunto. Deus era um problema, né? Talvez o seu estudo e a sua reflexão esteja tentando recolocar, né, no seu próprio lugar, né, pelo menos foi assim que eu interpretei, algumas ideias, enfim, do próprio século XVII, dos fundadores da ciência moderna. Eu gostaria de saber se essa aproximação entre o Deus do Newton, que era o que garantia que as leis naturais funcionavam, né, se esse Deus tem algum paralelo, né, com a consciência, a supraconsciência, né, que o senhor propõe como sendo o princípio, né, a partir do qual os fenômenos do mundo, a realidade, né, estaria constituída.
Yes, this is a very, very good question. The concepts of classical physics initially did not separate God, as you say, but then gradually it was found that God is not needed. Once God has set up the movement of the world, then God becomes a caretaker of his garden, and that's the most classical physics can do. But then in quantum physics there is this problem, measurement problem. How do possibilities become actual events? So we have a room for consciousness, and this consciousness has to be a cosmic consciousness. So it has the resemblance to how God is portrayed, at least in the esoteric traditions of spirituality, not quite in the popular mind. Popular mind thinks God as some emperor, some sort of superhuman being sitting in the sky. That image of God, of course, is very unscientific, and I hope it is clear that we are not talking about God in that kind of way. But God is in this more cosmical consciousness, in this more esoteric way. This kind of God now makes a comeback, because if you remember, The debate between theologians and scientists always have been, is God the caretaker or does God intervene? Now, theologians maintain that God intervenes, at least in biological beings, and then Darwin came along. That was, of course, a crucial blow to theology, because before then, Newton notwithstanding, theologians could always give the example of biology, where purposiveness is very obvious, or at least obvious to most people. But Darwin's theory gave a blow to that, because once you say that evolution occurs, then is evolution natural? Darwin said, yes, it is natural, chance and necessity. There is no need for God in evolution either. There is no need for God in biology. Then in 20th century came behaviorism, and the idea that we have subjective free will. This idea too went down the drain, because behaviorists tended to show with their experiments that we are very conditioned. There really isn't any free will. Against all this, mind you, also grew quantum physics around the same time as behaviorism grew. And quantum physics has this peculiar thing, uncertainty principle. Now, the world is not determined like we thought. God is not a caretaker. Uncertainty principle gave rise to webs of possibility, this idea. Then collapse of the webs of possibility. Von Neumann introduced the idea of consciousness collapsing. Paradoxes were raised against this idea. But then in the 90s, myself, Henry Stapp, Fred Alan Wolf, Nick Herbert, all these people together, we showed that no, these paradoxes can be resolved. There really isn't any paradox if we assume that the consciousness that collapses webs of possibility into actual events is a cosmic consciousness. And it collapses, the event of collapse itself gives us the subject-object separation of the world. So not only we solved the problem of quantum measurement, but we also gave a very wonderful and novel answer of how the one consciousness becomes many, how it divides itself into subject and object so that it can see itself. So this idea that world is a play of consciousness, a play of God, which is a very mystical idea, came back again. And then we can go back to biology. Does God intervene in biology? Does God intervene in people's lives? And these questions still are finding very positive answers. I have shown in a paper on evolutionary biology that indeed in biology there are very well-known holes in Darwinian theory. These holes are called punctuation marks. Darwin's theory of evolution explains certain homeostatic stages of evolution. In other words, how species adapt to environmental changes. But it really does not explain how one species becomes another species. So this speciation, change of species into another, this novel change in evolution is really not contained in Darwin's theory. Experimentally, it shows up as fossil gaps. We really do not have a continuous fossils that shows how a reptile becomes a bird. So the idea then is that maybe these are punctuation marks, very quick stages of evolution. Now I'm suggesting that this really is a quantum leap in evolution. And in this quantum leap, consciousness has intervened. Not in a subjective way, not in a whimsical way, very objective, and these objective ideas are becoming clear with work of biologists Rupert Sheldrake and others, how this can be objective, but yet there is undoubtedly intervention of downward causation. You cannot explain biological evolution with just upward causation. So this is, I think, the most exciting thing, that from that original thinking of physicists that God has to be a caretaker because everything can be explained and everything is determined, we don't need God. Now we are coming full circle and seeing that not only we need God, there are really discontinuous movements in the world for which no mathematics, no logical explanation can be given. And yet it is fully objective. It's not arbitrary. God acts, but in well-defined objective ways. Cosmic consciousness is not subjective. It's not a person's individual consciousness that is affecting the world. but in a cosmic way, so that we can talk about it objectively. So science retains its power, its objectivity, and yet we now have discontinuity, we have interconnectedness, so we can talk about many subjects that mystics traditionally talk about.
Ok, pergunta do Dr. Weil. Dr. Weil, por favor.
Durante essa discussão, eu me coloquei como educador do ponto de vista do telespectador, e estou um pouco com medo que alguns já fechem o aparelho diante do alto nível científico do debate que é necessário e indispensável. E eu queria ressaltar a importância da sua presença aqui, em termos mais simples. Para o telespectador, tem telespectadores que acreditam em Deus, acreditam em espiritualidade, e tem outros que não acreditam em Deus, não acreditam, são os materialistas versus os espiritualistas, e entre os dois tem os que não sabem ou os que nem se interessam para isto. Nessas três categorias, a sua presença aqui tem uma importância muito grande. Ela tem uma importância porque nesse século que passou, nós estamos no fim dele, nesse século que passou, estamos assistindo a três grandes movimentos. O primeiro movimento em que muitos espiritualistas, muitas pessoas que acreditavam em Deus, abalados pelas provas, entre aspas, pelas evidências da ciência, largaram a religião e só acreditaram na matéria. E nisso foram até muitos sacerdotes de várias religiões. Largaram a batina, largaram a sua fé e se transformaram em protagonistas do materialismo. Estamos assistindo atualmente a um movimento contrário. Eu tenho, por exemplo, dois exemplos, dois amigos meus. Mathieu é um grande biólogo francês, largou a biologia, hoje ele é monge budista tibetano. Outro era astrofísico, colega seu, e largou a astrofísica, hoje ele é rabino. Então, estamos assistindo a um movimento contrário. A sua presença aqui apresenta uma terceira saída, e que me parece a mais conveniente e a mais razoável e a mais holística, que a minha também. A sua, como física quântica, fez com que, vindo do materialismo, não caiu no extremo do espiritualismo, mas integrou os dois. Eu fiz isso também como psicólogo, através da psicologia transpessoal. O senhor através da física quântica, eu através da psicologia transpessoal. E nós nos encontramos muito bem e nos abraçamos o tempo todo. A minha pergunta é uma pergunta pessoal. Poderia contar para os telespectadores, em termos mais simples, o que fez com que Amit Goswami ficasse no meio do caminho e fizesse um encontro dentro dele da razão da física quântica, da razão da física, da razão materialista, e do outro lado, da intuição. Falou nos seus amigos místicos, mas pela minha experiência, eu sei que a segurança pelas quais eu falo, ela não é apenas racional, ela é baseada numa experiência chamada interior, chamado subjetivo, chame como quiser, de luz e de saber mais ou menos como que é esse mundo espiritual. Qual é a sua experiência que fez com que uniu na sua pessoa o lado masculino, racional, o lado feminino, intuitivo, sentimental? O que aconteceu com a sua pessoa? Eu acho que isso vai nos reconciliar com os telespectadores.
Yes, thank you, Pierre. This is ultimately the question. I sometimes say that all of us, everyone, spectators, scientists, the speaker, the panelists here, all of us are torn between two selves of ourselves. One is similar to Newton, who wants to understand everything in terms of objectivity and science and mathematics. And the other is William Blake, who is mystical and directly hears intuitively and develops his pictures of the world on the basis of these intuitive insights. Now, what is happening in this integration, what is happening also for some time, even before this integration began, is that we are beginning to understand the nature of creativity. And the false notion that scientists only work with rational ideas and mathematics is gradually falling away. Now, Einstein once said this very clearly: I did not discover theory of relativity by rational thinking alone. But people disregard such comments as a whimsical comment. Einstein was quite serious. He knew that creativity is important. And now almost 100 years of research in creativity is showing that scientists also depend on intuition. Scientists also depend on creative insights to develop their sciences. It's not all rational and mathematical. It's not all based on rational thinking. Now, you asked me about my personal experience. I already shared the fundamental personal experience that I had when I switched. And I shouldn't even say I switched. I had an insight. It was an insight that I cannot describe in space-time terms. It was like I was outside of space and time, directly experiencing that consciousness is the ground of being. So it is this kind of experience that is the basis of why we become convinced, become certain that there is more to reality than what the space-time, matter-motion world make it appear to be. So here is then the fundamental scope for meeting of the grounds of scientists and spiritual people. Because spiritual people hear this call, hear this intuition much sooner. Scientists hear it too, but because they always express their insights in terms of logic, in terms of reasoning that comes later, they forget the origin of their work, the origin of their insight. Whereas in spiritual people, the insights lead to transformation of how they live. And therefore, they can never forget that it is intuition which really made them happy, which really made them who they are. This is the difference. Scientists use intuitions for developing systems that are outside of them, what I call outer creativity. And this becomes a camouflage of the real machinations of the world to them. Whereas spiritual people stay with the insight, change their lives, and incidentally change the outer world by exemplification. But they know from that insight they had is the fundamental thing that runs the world. So for them, consciousness is cosmic. This is just a given. For the scientists, that same discovery is possible, but the scientist ignores the call and pays too much attention to what happens in the outside arena. Oh. I think that as each one of us share this, the world can change. So I thank you for your question. I certainly am willing to share it. I have written a book on creativity where I tell my personal stories. And in all my books, I tell my personal stories. I think it is very important for all of us to share our personal stories and demolish the myth that scientists are rational thinkers only. They too have insights which go way beyond rational thinking.
Dr. Goswami, o senhor falou muito em Deus durante a primeira parte desse programa. E aqui no Ocidente, quando se fala em Deus, se imagina que exista o seu contraponto. E aqui no Ocidente se dá uma série de nomes a ele. Eu gostaria de saber como é que o senhor explica se o senhor concebe a existência desse contraponto, dessas outras forças que não são necessariamente Deus.
This question of God versus evil is very interesting. In the way that quantum physics is looking at this, there is the forces of creativity, and then there is the forces of conditioning. Now, we haven't talked about this very much, but I did posit the idea, fundamental idea that quantum physics gives us, that it is the cosmic consciousness which chooses among the possibilities to bring reality, the actual event that is manifested. The question is that then we have to get into this non-ordinary state of consciousness in which we are cosmic, in which we choose, and then how do we get into this very individualized consciousness where we are personal, where we have a personality, a character. When you work out the mathematics of this, then you find that this conditioning arises because all of our experiences appear after having reflected into the mirror of our memory many times over. It is this memory that causes conditioning, a propensity to act in the way I have acted before, a propensity to respond to a stimulus the way I have responded to the stimulus before. Of course, all wives know this because they do a hairdo entire morning, and then husband comes home and says, "What's for lunch?" without noticing anything about the wife's hairdo, which is very irritating, I'm sure. But this conditioning is what makes us individual. So the point is more that in quantum physics, we clearly see the role of the cosmic consciousness, which I call quantum self, where there is creativity, where there are creative forces. And then we lose that creativity. We become conditioned. And this condition makes us like a machine. So the primary evil that this new science is bringing to us is really conditioning, because it is this conditioning that makes us forget the godliness that we have, the creative power that we have, the creative force that really is what we mean when we invoke the word God. But this too is incomplete. The good-evil question really can be studied a little more thoroughly, and there are more scope of bringing in ideas such as negative emotions and positive emotions, and then we get a fuller exposition of good versus evil. But indeed, cosmic consciousness includes everything. This is the esoteric, not so exoteric, but esoteric concept behind all religions, that there is only God, and good and evil is a split that is a necessity of creation, but it's not fundamental. In other words, devil is not equal to God. Devil is a subsequent creation. It's useful to think in terms of good and evil, but sometimes you have to transcend it. Sometimes you have to really realize that God is everything. And this is the picture that quantum physics is supporting.
Dr. Joel.
Doutor Amit, eu sou psiquiatra, sou analista junguiano, formado pela Associação Junguiana do Brasil, e tenho muitas perguntas a fazer ao senhor, mas em vista do tempo e dos objetivos desse programa, eu vou me centrar numa delas. Eu pensei muito, quando li o seu livro, em questões que ainda são incógnitas na nossa prática psicoterápica, por exemplo, a questão do insight. O insight nós não sabemos, em psicoterapia, quando ele vai acontecer, como vai acontecer. Ele simplesmente aparece quase que do nada, embora a gente intua que o insight vá aparecer. A questão da criatividade, a questão da sincronicidade, mas eu gostaria de fazer uma pergunta sobre os arquétipos. O senhor menciona no seu livro a ideias de arquétipos de objetos mentais. Cita Platão e cita Jung, que é o criador da psicologia analítica, setor da psicoterapia, onde eu me situo. A questão que tem me perturbado muito é: os arquétipos evoluem, embora eles estejam fora do eixo espaço-tempo? Alguns autores dizem que está havendo uma evolução dos arquétipos. Quem fala isso, por exemplo, é Sheldrake, que o senhor mencionou há pouco, e que não é psicólogo, é biólogo, mas que tem uma visão diferente dentro do campo da biologia. Como é que a sua teoria, a teoria da física quântica, explicaria, supondo que os arquétipos evoluem, a evolução dos próprios pensamentos arquetípicos? Por exemplo, a evolução do arquétipo de Deus, se é que ele está evoluindo ou não. Essa questão. E há muitos outros arquétipos que nós supomos que estejam evoluindo sem anularem os arquétipos anteriores.
Thank you for the question, Joel. I am a great follower of Jung. I think Jung was one of the precursors of the integration that is taking place now. I think in my earlier writings I used to quote constantly Jung saying that someday nuclear physics and psychology will come together. And I think Jung would be very pleased with this conversation we are having now, and in general with the integration of physics and transpersonal psychology that we are seeing today. Having said that, I think I am a believer in Jung's concept of archetype, and I think the way that Jung introduced it, and Plato introduced it, that these are eternal aspects of consciousness, eternal contexts of consciousness. Consciousness as a contextual body in which these archetypes are defined, and then they govern the movement of our thought. I think this is a very powerful concept. But at the same time, in quantum physics, one does have the idea that all bodies of consciousness, everything that pertains of consciousness, in consciousness, are possibilities. And because of that everything is possibility, then the question arises, can one even go beyond fixed archetypes and consider evolutionary archetypes? So I think one should not offhand rule out what Rupert is trying to say. There was similar idea by Brian Josephson, a Nobel laureate physicist, who once wrote a paper in Physical Review Letters, a very prestigious journal, that maybe physical laws are also evolving. And similarly, other people, very serious scientists, Paul Dirac has suggested that maybe gravity force changes with time. So this idea that fixed archetypes are there is a very important idea. I support it wholeheartedly, but I also see that in quantum physics there is a room for evolution of the archetypes. So we should not completely disregard ideas that say that archetypes evolve a bit. I think ultimately we should be able to figure this out experimentally. Thank you for the question.
Por favor.
O senhor manifesta certo interesse pelas questões éticas, grande parte do final de sua obra se dedica a essa questão. O senhor nos dice que a necessidade da participação da ambiguidade para dar garantias da criatividade no campo ético. Entretanto, no mesmo contexto, nos fala imediatamente das linhas e instruções éticas de uma obra monumental dentro da tradição indiana, que é a Bhagavad Gita. E a Bhagavad Gita inicia com um pressuposto enquanto instrução de um mestre para com um discípulo, de que ele deve agir, de que ele deve entrar no combate, de que ele deve assumir sua parte de ação, porque pertence a uma casta, a uma tradição de guerreiros em que a ação é própria. Como fica o livre-arbítrio, como fica a ambiguidade como necessidade da criatividade dentro de um contexto em que existe um pressuposto, obviamente não ambíguo e não escolhível. Ele não pode escolher o que fazer, mas está combinado a fazer, está combinado, não é certo, a agir. Como se dá isso, professor?
I think this is also a very difficult question, very subtle question. Indeed, if we take ethics to be compulsory, then there doesn't seem to be any choice. But ethics isn't that clear-cut. It's very ambiguous. I'm remembering the anecdote that the great philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre used to give. Suppose you go out on a swimming expedition, or a boating expedition rather, and the boat sinks, and you have a friend with you. You know how to swim, but your friend doesn't. But you are not a very strong person. So if you try to save him, then you might kill both of you. You have a good chance of saving yourself, but you love your friend. Your ethical duty to your friend is very clear. So what to do? Now, cases like this clearly show that there is ambiguity, even in ethical decisions, even in moral decisions. So in quantum physics, it's very clear that ultimately we must wait and wait for the insight, see that there is indeed a quantum leap, a creative answer, as you call it, a creative answer will come. And it is that creative answer which is the right answer for solving this ambiguity in ethical questions. I think when morality or ethics get posed as a set of rules and people practice them as rules, then they miss this ambiguous part of it. And because they miss it, the rules become moribund eventually. It's just a useless set of lifeless set of rules. Whereas if we take ethics as truly alive and recognize that we have a role to play in every ethical situation, we have a role to play in terms of going deep inside of us, just like creative people do, struggling with it, struggling with the ambiguity, then the quantum leap of insight will come and will enable us to take the right action. This is where what quantum physics is helping us. This conclusion is what quantum physics is helping us reach. And I think CERT was also looking for this answer, because a fixed ethics is an impossible thing to follow, really.
Cláudio.
Eu vou, infelizmente, ter que me estender ligeiramente na minha pergunta. Ela é precedida de uma declaração. Eu vou fazer uma interpretação do que foi declarado até agora, que eu acho que deve ser útil para o telespectador. Não estou fazendo isso para me expor, mas para esclarecer o que me parece ser algumas questões importantes nesse debate para o telespectador. O entrevistado faz menção a fenômenos inexplicados, a fenômenos desviantes, stray phenomena, de diversas disciplinas. Ele começa com a física, passa pela biologia, faz referência a problemas seculares com respeito à consciência humana, ao livre-arbítrio, ao modo como raciocinamos, ao modo como chegamos a conclusões. Menciona casos como, por exemplo, Einstein, declarando, como tantos outros cientistas que não sabem muito bem como chegou a uma conclusão. Poincaré, muito antes dele, havia escrito muito sobre isso. As investigações... Poincaré era um matemático, o último grande matemático universalista francês. Ele viveu no final, ele morreu no começo desse século. Bom, esse tipo de anedota é completamente, enfim, comum na ciência. Não há nenhuma originalidade nisso. Esse gênero de anedota e de fenômeno, repito, fenômenos inexplicados, que são característicos da ciência. A ciência, quanto mais sabe, menos sabe. Quanto mais a ciência sabe, quanto mais fenômenos são explicados, mais avenidas de desconhecimento se abrem. Um cientista diz não sei o tempo todo. Um não cientista explica tudo. Porque sempre tem uma resposta do tipo todo abrangente, como é esta resposta. O fato de se ter, isso o telespectador precisa entender, eu creio, o fato de se formular uma, entre aspas, uma pseudo-explicação a respeito de como o universo funciona, não dá a essa explicação foros de verdade. Simplesmente declarar coisas não confere verdade ao que se declara. Agora, no que o senhor declara, existe uma característica que eu acho bastante preocupante, ou pelo menos intrigante, vinda de alguém que se educou como físico, como o senhor declarou. Como o senhor declarou. Como o senhor foi físico. O senhor diz, em primeiro lugar, que aquilo que seria essa intervenção de uma consciência cósmica não é matematizável. Quer dizer, isso não é introdutível dentro da teoria física na forma como a teoria física aceita as suas ideias. Não existe outra maneira de introduzir na física ideias senão a matemática. Não existe, não é possível, não é física. Se é não matematizável, não é física. Muito bem. Então, essa ideia de consciência cósmica não é física. Quer dizer, certamente nenhum físico aceitará isso. Em segundo lugar, ela também, já que se está falando de alguma coisa que existe no mundo, que é uma consciência cósmica, que se reflete na consciência das pessoas, e as pessoas fazem fazer saltos quânticos, não sei se o senhor não vai usar esse termo, mas saltos quânticos em direção à solução de problemas, onde é que estão as evidências empíricas disso? Onde estão as experiências que levam a esse tipo de conclusão? Porque ou se a gente pode ter conhecimento do mundo que seja muito estruturado, como no caso da física, ou conhecimento do mundo pouco estruturado. Não existe uma teoria, não existe um conjunto de ideias muito organizado por trás, mas sabemos empiricamente que são verdadeiras ou parecem verdadeiras. Onde é que estão as evidências empíricas e onde está o raciocínio, eu diria, desculpe a palavra, científico, que o leva a declarar que existiria uma consciência cósmica que estaria governando tudo e resolvendo todos os problemas. O senhor resolveu todos os problemas aqui, da biologia, da psicologia. O senhor afirma que essas suas ideias explicariam, por exemplo, o problema da biologia evolucionista dos gaps na criação de espécies, está certo? Por exemplo, não é? O senhor não acha um pouco ambicioso demais? E repito, onde é que estão as evidências empíricas disso?
Very good question. Very good question. One constantly has to ask this question, where is the evidence? Let me come to the evidence a little bit later, but first answer the question of, is physics mathematical? Does physics have to be completely mathematical? Now, this is a belief that has grown gradually in physics because of the success of mathematics to express physics. Two things you must remember about this. First of all, there is no reason for physics to be mathematical. Philosophers sometimes raise this question. Nancy Cartwright, I think, wrote a book, Why Do Laws of Physics Lie? Because she was just making the point that there is no proof within materialist philosophy that mathematics should govern the laws of physics. Mathematics, where does mathematics come from? You know, people like Richard Feynman, great physicist, Eugene Bigner, they have all struggled with this question. And there is no really answer within materialist philosophy. Plato has an answer. Mathematics gives the framework of physics because mathematics is before physics. It's part of the archetypal world that we discussed earlier. So idealism, Plato's idealism is essential to understand the role of mathematics in physics in the first place. So physics itself needs something other than matter, namely mathematics and archetypes, in order to be a consistent science. That one should remember. And then the second question is, second aspect, of course, of this question is the most important one. In quantum physics, we have looked and looked and looked of a mathematical way of closing quantum mechanics, mathematical way to understand quantum measurement. We have not been able to. As Niels Bohr pointed out to Erwin Schrödinger a long time ago, during the period when quantum mechanics was being developed, Schrödinger thought that he has gotten continuity back again. And Niels Bohr proved otherwise to him, convinced him, and Schrödinger blotted out that if I knew that these discontinuities, quantum leaps, are going to stay, then I would have never discovered quantum mechanics. And Niels Bohr said that we are very happy that you did, though. So these discontinuities are here to stay. No mathematical explanation can be given. And because no mathematical explanation can be given, therefore there is room for free will. So free will, God, consciousness collapsing, all these things enter physics because we have reached the knowledge, the wisdom that there really is uncertainty principle, there really is probability and possibility, and because there really is probability and possibilities, there has to be an agency that collapses possibilities into actual events. And this agency could not be a mathematical agency, because then, again, there could be no free will. It would be all deterministic. But it is not deterministic. The uncertainty principle is fundamental. And so we have really reached the conclusion, after decades of struggle, as Henry Stapp, we meaning the, we meaning that there is a consensus among scientists.
A respeito de suas ideias?
There
is a consensus in terms of the ideas?
No, not about my ideas. Forget about my ideas per se. But there is a consensus that there is no mathematical solution of the quantum measurement problem. That we have reached a consensus. And because there is no mathematical solution of the quantum measurement problem, and because there is a consistent solution in terms of consciousness collapsing quantum possibility into actuality, we can talk about these ideas publicly. Now to your second question, is there empirical evidence? It just so happens that the two fundamental aspects of the new physics, namely does consciousness collapse possibility into actuality, and the second one, that is this consciousness a cosmic consciousness, both of these aspects have been verified by empirical data. I'll give you the data for the second one first, because that one is a bit simpler for the audience. The first one will be a little bit difficult, that maybe we can get both in. The first experiment is very important because it has been replicated. In 1993-94, the Mexican neurophysiologist Jacobo Greenberg Zilberbaum, he and his collaborators did a fantastic experiment in which they had two observers meditate together for 20 minutes with the intention that they will have direct communication. Direct communication in the style of non-locality. No local signals going between them, and yet they will have communication that must be called communication. All right, so they meditate together. They are told to hold that meditative state during the rest of the experiment. But then one subject is taken away to another chamber. They are both sitting in Faraday chambers. No electromagnetic communication is possible to Faraday chambers. Now, their brains are connected to EEG machines. One subject is shown a series of light flashes. This subject's brain responds with electrical activity from which an evoked potential is extracted. Very clear peaks, very clear phases. The other subject's brain shows activity from which the researchers are able to extract a transferred potential, which is very similar in strength and 70% identical in phase with the first subject's evoked potential. Now, what is most interesting is that if you take control subjects, two people who have not meditated together, or two people who could not hold the intention of being directly communicative, for them, there was no transfer potential. But in the case of people who meditated together, almost invariably in many, many runs, about 1 in 4 cases, we get this phenomenon of transferred potential. And then Peter Fenwick in England, just a couple of years ago, he has verified this, replicated this experiment. So we have empirical evidence. I could, if we had the time and you had the patience, I could have given you so many pieces of data. The other piece of data is also very interesting. You take the case of random number generators, which are really quantum devices, because what they do is they take radioactive decay events, which are random, convert them into sequences of numbers, like sequences of zeros and ones. Now, in long runs, you should get equal number of zeros and ones. That is the expectation of randomness. Now, what Helmut Schmidt, a physicist who became a parapsychology researcher, have been trying to do for almost 20 years, is to let psychics influence these random number generators to produce non-random sequences, more zeros than 1. And over the years, Schmidt has got a good piece of evidence that to a small extent the psychics are able to do that. Several standard deviation result. Now, that has nothing to do with quantum physics yet. But recently, in a paper published in 1993, Schmidt reported a revolutionary modification of this data. What he has done more recently is that the random number generator, the findings of the random number generator, the sequence is stored in a computer, a printout is made, but nobody looks at anything. And then this printout, which is sealed in an envelope, is sent to an independent observer. 3 months later, the independent observer, without opening the envelope, chooses what he wants to see, more zeros or more ones. And then he arbitrarily, with his own criterion. Then he calls the experimenter, and experimenter now tells the psychic to look at the computer display of the data and asks the psychic to modify the results, influence the results if he can. So psychic tries to produce more zeros if that's what the independent observer wanted. And then the independent observer opens the envelope and verifies if the psychic has been able to do it. And the amazing conclusion is, it's a 3 standard deviation result, so cannot be thrown away that easily. Amazing result is that the psychics in 4 out of 5 tries were able to change the randomness of random number generator even after 3 months. So this myth that things become collapsed by themselves, this myth that things become collapsed objectively without a conscious observer looking at them, is a myth. Nothing happened. Everything remained possibility until conscious observers look at them. In a control experiment, people intervened this. People looked at them without telling anyone. People looked at the data, the printout. In those cases, the psychic could not influence the data. So it is clear that consciousness has an effect, just as Niels Bohr suspected, just as von Neumann suspected. Now we are having a fuller, more complete theory and more complete experiments based on these theories. Henry Stapp, who is a co-author of all these ideas that I'm presenting to you, consciousness collapsing quantum wave functions into actual events, he participated with Schmidt in that experiment. So we are seeing a revolutionary change in physics, no less revolutionary that came with Copernicus. Now, of course, there will be reactions such as you are presenting, and we have to be very patient and calm and work together to get over these reactive tendencies. But be sure that there is something here that all of us should look at. This is revolutionary, this is new, and this can change, as Pierre was talking earlier, the difficulties with values that society at large is facing. So let's not get bogged down too much about how can this be, but rather look at the data, look at the theory, and wonder, can this be? If it is, then what a wonderful opportunity we have to integrate all these disparate movements of consciousness that has separated us for so long.
Dr. Goswami, dentro dessas explicações que o senhor nos deu até agora, como fica a questão da reencarnação e da preservação dessa consciência dos seres humanos?
The question of reincarnation probably is the most radical question that can be asked. And it is an amazing thing, I think, that quantum physics enables us to give an answer in the affirmative. I myself was as surprised as any from this. When initially people were asking me this question, I refused to engage with it. But then I once saw a dream, woke up from a dream, and basically the dream was telling me, I heard this in the dream, that Tibetan Book of the Dead is right, and it's your job to prove it. After waking up from that dream, I became serious in reincarnational research. Basically, the problem of reincarnation is this. The physical body dies, and then what is left? Now, if consciousness is the ground of being, immediately we get the idea that consciousness is left. That's the first clue. The second clue is that everything is possibilities in quantum way of looking at things. So it is not far-fetched that possibilities can live on. Obviously, some of the possibilities have died with the material body and the brain, but there may be other possibilities. There may be other possibilities that get modified during the way of our living, and these modifications of those probabilities of the possibilities might form a confluence that might be lived later in somebody else's lives. So it is this kind of idea that I have been able to develop in a more full way. A book will come out next year. And I'm very glad to say that, yes, we can deal with this question. The advantage of asking such questions is to immediately see where the utility of the new science is going to come. Because these are the questions that people worry about. People really are fundamentally bothered by questions like, what happens when I die? And if the new physics, new science can answer such questions, apart from the importance of psychology, transpersonal psychology, and Jungian psychology, where the new science is helping, and also alternative medicine, which we have not even discussed yet, I think we'll really touch people's heart when we can say, well, finally, science can give you a helping hand in understanding this question. Up till now, it's only the priest or the theologian who can give any assurance to the person. And now, if we can say that, look, it really makes sense to ask this question, and you can do something about it now to help you with what will happen to you after you die. Isn't that just wonderful progress in science that we are making?
Toji. Professor Amit, eu vou fazer uma pergunta baseada no trabalho de um ex-orientando de tese de doutoramento que eu orientei na Universidade Estadual de Campinas e que fez a primeira tese, pelo menos na Unicamp e talvez em qualquer universidade estadual ou federal do Brasil, sobre parapsicologia. Ele fez uma tese sobre clarividência. E eu não vou, naturalmente, falar da metodologia do trabalho, que seria bastante extenso, mas resumir, pelo menos, os resultados principais. Uma pessoa, aliás, várias pessoas, vários sujeitos, tentavam adivinhar as cartas de um baralho de símbolos geométricos, um baralho de Zener, muito usado em pesquisa de parapsicologia, e tentava adivinhar as cartas de um baralho tarô, que é baseado em imagens arquetípicas, o rei, a rainha, etc. Nos resultados que foram feitos segundo uma metodologia tradicional, estatística, as pessoas acertaram no baralho de Zener um pouquinho acima do que era esperado ao acaso, e 10% acima no baralho de tarô, comparando com o de Zener. Eu perguntaria, bom, a explicação dada pelo meu orientando foi dentro da teoria da psicologia analítica, em relação aos arquétipos emergentes que, de uma certa forma, estariam mobilizados mais no baralho de tarô do que no baralho simplesmente de símbolos geométricos. Mas essa explicação, embora nos satisfaça um pouco, ainda deixa muito a desejar. Eu perguntaria se o senhor teria alguma explicação a mais baseada na teoria quântica sobre essa maior adivinhação das cartas do baralho de tarô, que são símbolos arquetípicos, em relação ao baralho comum de Zener, que são 4 símbolos geométricos, quadrado, círculo, etc.
Yes. Thank you for the question. Actually, only in Brazil, somebody would think of doing this brilliant experiment. You know, I have been coming to Brazil for the last 5 years under the auspices of Unipaz, and really I get delighted with the Brazilian mind. So, what is the difference between the original experiment that was done, like card guessing, and this tarot card? I think that the idea that I would like to propose, which I think you are thinking in the same vein, is that when the object that we are using in telepathy is meaningful, it's a better object. The previous scientists, parapsychologists, were too hung up in objectivity, and they missed this point. Now, in new parapsychology experiments, I hope we use more and more meaningful objects as the objects that will telepathically transfer. And you are right, the complete explanation has to use the word telepathy, has to use non-local transfer of information. In this case, non-local transfer of meaningful archetypal information to be sure, and that is the reason for the amplification of the results. But I think non-locality, quantum non-locality, if you please, will have to be invoked in order to get a complete explanation of what happened. Thank you.
Cordella, por favor.
Doutor Emmett, eu juntei algumas questões nisso, que eu não vou tratar delas como perguntas, porque eu acho que na sua obra, pelo menos no que eu pude ler, né, há um aprofundamento disso e uma leitura mais detalhada ofereceria. Mas questões, por exemplo, no campo da psicanálise, essa ideia de que o universo é quando é percebido e é até interferido, será que não seria uma postura um pouco ego-narcísica, né, da nossa parte, um pouco antropocêntrica em relação ao próprio universo, que dificulta a ideia de um cosmo, né? Invertendo Dostoiévski. Dostoiévski disse que se Deus não existe, tudo é permitido. Nessa compreensão, parece que se Deus existe, aí é que tudo é permitido, né? Porque existe aí uma probabilidade que pode ser interferida. E uma outra questão, que eu acho que está na sua obra, mas que eu acho que vale aprofundamento, é e o ateísmo metodológico, que sempre foi tão caro para a ciência, para poder buscar explicações. Ele não é mais necessário. Mas aí a questão de fundo. Eu tenho lido, não sei se é verdade, que a física quântica mostra que hoje o tempo é uma ilusão. Inclusive, alguns têm dito que não se fala mais em universo, mas em multiverso, porque haveria vários universos paralelos. E isso traria um problema, a possibilidade de viajar no tempo. A maior explicação que eu achei até hoje contra a viagem no tempo foi do físico inglês, o Stephen Hawking, que usou um argumento lógico. Ele disse, é impossível viajar no tempo, porque se um dia for possível isso, os homens do futuro já teriam voltado. Mas a física quântica, ao falar em universos paralelos, levanta a possibilidade de se ter o tempo como uma mera ilusão humana. Isso me coloca a seguinte pergunta aí para o senhor. Será que nós chegaremos, com a física quântica, a voltar à origem do cosmos e aí sim encontrar o princípio explicativo?
Well, this is both of your points are very good, and the question, of course, is extremely fascinating. The first point I would like to make is that we are not saying everything is possible just because you have included consciousness in our theories, because we are still agreeing completely with quantum physics that upward causation shapes the form of the possibilities from which consciousness chooses. So both upward causation and downward causation play fundamental roles in the new physics, new science. This is one of the virtues we have. The new science absorbs the old science in the limit of correspondence principle, in the limit that we can talk in terms of probabilities only for large number of things, large number of events. So the old science does not disappear. It could not. It's based solidly on experimental data. New science expands the old science into arenas that the old science cannot handle, like single events of creation, creativity. So that's my first point. About backward in time, you know, there are quantum experiments. Now, the famous one is delayed choice experiment, but it's too long to go into and too involved for the spectators to really appreciate. Although, if you are interested, anyone who is watching out there, there are books describing this. Please read up, it's fascinating. There is something happening. This idea of going backwards in time is real in quantum physics. We can get affected by things in the future, just as we get affected by things in the past. So in quantum physics, indeed, time is nonlinear. Having said that, of course, recent experiments are so astounding, so surprising that many physicists, many conventional, conservative physicists are looking for ways of time travel. But I think the consensus is that time travel will involve much more than just this observation from quantum mechanics. We cannot rule it out anymore. but it will involve much more because we still have gross problems of how to bring big quantum effects in handling macro bodies, because quantum effects are very prominent only for microscopic objects and not so prominent for macro objects. Measurement situation is an exception. But ordinarily, we have only found laser beams, superconductors, just a few things, a few macro objects where quantum effects persist. So we have to solve this problem of how about macro bodies that needs to be transferred across time. And that's going to take a while. I think if consciousness is put back into this equation, which it has to at some point, then another dimension of thinking will open up, and that might give us new answers, new insights into this. But it's too premature to talk about on this show, I think.
Rosemarie, por favor.
Eu sou interessada muito em história da tecnologia, porque eu acho que é através da tecnologia que os sistemas econômicos se desenvolvem e que cresce uma dominação de potências hegemônicas. Eu sei, isso vai muito na linha da pergunta do Cláudio Weber Abramo. Eu sei que o senhor está trabalhando na construção do primeiro computador quântico. Eu quero perguntar uma coisa: o computador quântico dá saltos quânticos? Ele cria? Qual a diferença dele do computador determinístico?
That is a very, very interesting question, Rosemary. What is a quantum computer, first of all? A quantum computer, instead of using a specific algorithm, uses ambiguous algorithm. So quantum computer is one in which superpositions of possibilities are used. And in this way, one expects that it will be much, much, much faster than the conventional computer. Now, so long as quantum computer is operating just at this level, I don't expect quantum computer to be all that novel, except that it will compute much faster. Now, this is the aspect that computer scientists are interested at present. But I have a different kind of interest in the quantum computer. If the quantum computer is now built, because it is a quantum processor, it processes on superpositions of possibility. That's right, just as the human being does.
Yeah.
Human brain similarly processes in a quantum way the possibilities instead of working algorithmically directly on without ambiguity. So can one then make a computer which has all the other aspects of a quantum measurement situation? The quantum measurement situation involves a mechanism which I call tangled hierarchy. This is a little bit hard to understand, but one example is the sentence, "I am a liar." If you think about it, you will see that the hierarchical relationship between the subject and predicate is now reciprocal. I qualifies liar, but liar qualifies I, and both qualifies each other. This is called a tangled hierarchy. The quantum measurement in the brain is like this. So the very intriguing question to me is that suppose in some future we made a tangled hierarchical quantum computer. Now what is very interesting is that tangled hierarchy gives rise to self-reference. So will this quantum computer will have self-reference? Will consciousness cooperate in making a human-made device, not developed evolutionarily, but developed by human intelligence? Will consciousness cooperate? Will the cosmic consciousness within us cooperate and make this into a conscious being? I don't know the answer to that. So, but this would be a fundamental verification, one of the most wonderful verification of the ideas that we are talking about today. So I think this research should be encouraged anyway. Thank you for the question.
Ria, por favor.
Tentando fazer, não é certo, uma síntese dentro das ideias da biologia, dentro das ideias da psicologia e, logicamente, não é certo, da física que o senhor coloca. Até o que hoje sabemos apenas 2% de nosso cérebro utiliza vias neurocerebrais para a entrada e saída de informação. E é a partir disso que nós construímos o que chamamos os objetos ideais universais que constituem a ciência. O 98% restante pertence a um universo interno, nebuloso, no qual existe a fantasia, a ilusão, logicamente a irracionalidade e também, não é certo, a probabilidade. Até que ponto podemos dizer que é possível um verdadeiro diálogo com essa disparidade de porcentagens? Até que ponto podemos dizer que é possível uma cientificação das ideias de Deus ou das ideias internas, humanas, divinizadas, como queira chamar isso?
In other words, let me see if I understand the question. There are many things which are fantasy, yes. And there are many things which involve God. Now, is it possible to make this fantasy aspects of things scientific? Well, that's a very interesting question. Of course, in creativity, we do make fantasies. We do make fantasies somewhat scientific because some of the fantasies are creative fantasies. In other words, imagination, the mental parts of our life, the internal part of our life, is very fundamental in what we do in the external world. So in the new science, because we are equally involved with the external world and the internal, because subjectivity is back in science, we are validating the concept that maybe we should take some of our fantasies seriously. Because, you see, the opposite idea can also be posited, that it's all a fantasy. Fantasy of the mind, fantasy of consciousness. Because consciousness is the ground of being, so what we thought is material and real, and what we thought fantasy and unreal, this distinction is now very blurred. They are all possibilities of consciousness. And therefore, it is consciousness which validates them, which chooses among them, which gives them substantiality. And so which one will be substantial depends entirely on the choice, the context in which consciousness looks at them. And this will revolutionize society, as you anticipate with your question. In other words, we will take our internal world much more seriously. I often say to people that if they studied their dream, you know, the usual prejudice we have is that dreams are not continuous, therefore what good is it to study them? But there is now some evidence that dreams are continuous, but you have to look at them from the meaning point of view. Jungians would be very happy with this scientific finding, that dreams are giving a report on our meaning part of our life. So there are other aspects of life which you cannot deal with the materialist science, which now we can deal with because we are putting consciousness back in, for example, meaning. And when we do that, our internal life takes on a tremendous importance. Yes, the internal life deals with meaning, beauty, the archetypes, in a different way than the outside material life can. And therefore, by focusing on the internal life, we not only can transform ourselves, that's the mystical part, but also can get enormous insights about what to create, how to create, about our arts, about our music, even about science.
Dr. Weil.
Eu queria primeiro felicitar esse programa, Roda Viva, pelas iniciativas que está tomando. Eu quero dizer que é a primeira vez que eu vejo na televisão problemas tratados no nível que merece, na altitude que merece, problemas como a parapsicologia, a psicologia transpessoal. Isso é feito graças a uma mudança de paradigma. E eu queria realçar de novo para o público e o telespectador que o que estamos tratando aqui tem uma influência muito grande sobre a destruição da vida no planeta e a grande crise de violência que está assolando atualmente o mundo, não é só o Brasil. Eu queria, já que estamos no fim do programa, deixar a oportunidade a Amit Goswami, que nós convidamos na nossa Universidade da Paz em Brasília, justamente porque ele representa um novo paradigma, como que o antigo paradigma é responsável pela violência atual do mundo, a antiga visão está responsável pela destruição da vida no planeta, e como o novo paradigma pode nos ajudar a nos tirar dessa crise, além de medidas policiais e de mudança de lei que são necessárias, mas são absolutamente insuficientes.
Thank you, Pierre. I think that it is extremely important to recognize that without recognizing consciousness as the ground of being, and without recognizing the value of our internal life, without recognizing the value for transforming, will never change the violence in society. So it is very important to see that just by thinking about nonviolence, just by speaking about it, we cannot be nonviolent. It has to go through the entire creative process. The new sciences, the new paradigm is extremely important because it always emphasizes creativity. In the old science, determinism and behaviorism, this idea that conditioning prevails, so blinded us towards transformation, so blinded us that we gave up. Basically, values are unnecessary. Steven Weinberg says there is no meaning in the universe. There is no value is the consensus judgment of materialist scientists. And that is winning society in one hand. And then behaviorists say, well, we cannot do anything anyway. We are behavioral beings, we are conditioned. And now the new science is saying that, no, there is also the creative forces within us. Just learn how to act from that non-ordinary state of consciousness in which you have choice. So, you know, my new motto, instead of Cartesian, I think, therefore I am, and thinking indeed is behavioral condition, the new motto is I choose, therefore I am. So if it is I choose, therefore I am, then I can choose nonviolence. But I have to learn how to choose, and that requires creativity. So this is really the new thrust of the new paradigm. Instead of choosing just the conditioned half of the world, we are opening up the world into both conditioning and creativity. Forces of good and evil, if you will, that we touched earlier. So we can be very optimistic, I think. If this new paradigm shift comes soon, then perhaps we can really deal with violence in a very practical, cogent way, instead of just lip-serving it, which is what we usually do.
Dr. Ziller, por favor.
Eu, quando estava fazendo a minha primeira leitura, né, dos seus trabalhos, eu percebi um sentimento que eu compartilho, né, de um incômodo profundo com relação a algumas conclusões que emergem de determinados meios científicos. Vou dar só um exemplo, acho que o telespectador vai se lembrar certamente, de algum tempo atrás, apareceu um resultado de um laboratório dos Estados Unidos que falava da descoberta do gene da homossexualidade. Mais recentemente, falou-se no gene da obesidade. E, bom, há toda uma série de conclusões desse tipo que não deixam de produzir nos homens, de bom senso, eu diria, uma certa surpresa, né? E, contudo, mesmo em homens que são, digamos, materialistas bem convencidos, né, que não aceitam, rejeitam, né, esse determinismo radical que emerge de alguns ambientes científicos, sobretudo norte-americanos. Quer dizer, há um materialismo que convive muito bem com o livre-arbítrio, né? Há um realismo filosófico, né, que convive muito bem, né, sem muito inconveniente, com paradoxos, com contradições. Isso não é, digamos, o todo, né, do que se poderia chamar atividade científica. Por fim, quer dizer, eu gostaria de fazer uma pergunta, é a questão mais importante que eu teria a colocar, que emerge também de uma sensação que eu tive a ler o Universo Autoconsciente. Eu tive a sensação de retornar ao passado, aí sim uma viagem ao passado, né? Eu vi ali, organizado de uma forma muito particular por você, ideias e proposições que eu já havia conhecido em leituras por exemplo, da obra do cardeal Nicolau de Cusa, que é um grande pensador do século XV, que propôs que o universo era resultado de uma contração de Deus, e essa contração, enfim, não é o caso aqui de eu explanar sobre essa filosofia. Mas esse tipo de pensamento produziu ou interagiu com concepções científicas do século XVI, do século XVII, né? Com concepções que propunham que a divindade organizasse, né? Ou, enfim, de uma forma, não é o caso dos detalhes, acho que não vão aborrecer os telespectadores, mas o fato propunha uma visão bastante parecida com essa, um projeto científico bastante parecido com esse que você está propondo nesse seu livro. Bom, a humanidade passou por um processo muito longo, muito duro, né, para conseguir, digamos, não eliminar Deus da ciência, mas pelo menos reduzir um pouco o seu papel. Esse processo foi longo e lento. Para concluir, como o senhor acredita, né, poder convencer os cientistas, né, desse seu projeto, depois de tanto esforço, né, para conseguir, enfim, criar uma noção de objetividade, de realidade, de realismo, com todos os exageros em alguns momentos, mas, enfim, convencer esses homens depois de tanto esforço. O senhor imagina conseguir isso com usando que gênero de recursos?
Yes, I believe that the ideas will stand on their own, they will be verified in the laboratory, and they will be useful. Science has two fundamental criteria. This is why Galileo is called the father of modern science, because he discovered and enunciated both criteria very clearly. One is that science must be verifiable. Science must be verified, experimentally tested. And the second idea was that science must be useful. So in the verification arena, I think I have already presented a couple of experiments to you. Because time is short, I won't get into any other experiments, but to say that there are enormous number of experiments that is coming up thanks to parapsychology and people's interest in parapsychology. But also in biology, mind-body medicine is a big area of experimental verifications of some of our ideas. But the question of usefulness is the most important one. Deepak Chopra has become very famous. He wrote a book called Quantum Healing about 10 years ago, which started revolutionizing medicine in some way. Because there is this phenomenon called placebo effect, for which scientists don't have any explanation. And Chopra's kind of thinking, which is very similar to my thinking, by the way. And indeed, I have written papers elucidating the connection between these ideas and Chopra's ideas. But look at the implication of this. If indeed there is quantum healing, if indeed there is mind-body medicine, effect of mind on healing, then people actually will be helped, not only in the realm of psychology, but in the realm of actual physical health. Actual physical health that is bothersome to many more people than mental health. You know, we are still not awakened enough to consider mental health all that seriously. But physical health, everyone is concerned, and very seriously. So it is the application of the new science to these areas, especially the health area, which I think is going to bring the revolution that yes, God is important, yes, consciousness is important, yes, creativity is important, yes, looking at free will and responsibility is important, yes, we have a scientific paradigm now which can tie all of these things together, bring them together with the old science that we already have, and have definite objective ways of proceeding and predicting. So it is a predictive science, it can be verified, and also can be useful. This is what is going to change the public's perception, and scientists' perception as well. Thank you.
Dr. Goswami, thank you very much for coming here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have enjoyed being here.
Okay, thank you. O Roda Viva está chegando ao fim. Nós queremos agradecer a presença aqui do Dr. Amit Goswami, que é físico indiano, radicado nos Estados Unidos, e também aqui a todos os entrevistadores que estiveram conosco no programa Roda Viva de hoje. Nós queremos agradecer a colaboração de todos e dizer que o Roda Viva volta na semana que vem a partir das 10h30 da noite. Muito obrigado pela sua atenção e até lá. Tenha uma boa semana.